Atlanta, Georgia, 3 a.m. A heavy-duty tow truck operates with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a midnight assassin. There is no knock on the front door. There is no final written warning left on the windshield. A hydraulic lift slides silently under the chassis of a 2017 Nissan Altima. Within 60 seconds, the vehicle vanishes into the dark, leaving an empty spot on the cracked concrete and a sudden, devastating hole in the financial life of the family asleep inside the house. For the repo man behind the wheel, it is just another Tuesday shift. Business is booming right now. Across the United States, repossession agencies are running out of physical asphalt to store reclaimed vehicles. But this Nissan Altima is not just a car. Look closely at the financial paperwork. This vehicle is a highly complex financial derivative. It is a microscopic slice of a multi-million-dollar bond, stamped with a gold-plated AAA rating by Wall Street credit agencies, and sitting comfortably in the portfolio of a municipal workers' pension fund. The 2008 financial crash is happening again. But this time, the toxic assets are not parked in ghost town subdivisions. They are parked right in your driveway. 15 years ago, Wall Street nearly vaporized the global economy by bundling predatory subprime mortgages into collateralized debt obligations. They took loans destined to fail, handed them to borrowers who could never pay them back, and bundled them together. When the housing market stopped going up, the massive bubble burst, taking Lehman Brothers and millions of American livelihoods down with it. Following the crash, bankers put on a suit of contrition. We were told the system was finally fixed, but the architects of that collapse did not learn a lesson about morality. They merely learned that the regulatory spotlight had shifted. They realized you do not need a 3-bedroom house to trap a consumer in unpayable debt. You just need a depreciating asset that an American worker cannot live without. To understand how they rebuilt the machine, hit the subscribe button to join the few who actually read the fine print of our financial system. The bankers simply switched their focus from houses to cars. Today, Americans owe a staggering $1.61 trillion in auto loans. Beneath that headline number lies a rotting foundation of subprime debt, originated at exorbitant interest rates and sold to institutional investors. The core mechanism driving this crisis is securitization. If a shadow bank makes a single loan to a subprime borrower at a 25% interest rate, that is an objectively terrible, high-risk asset. Any auditor would red flag it. But the financial engineers on Wall Street use a brilliant psychological trick. They gather 10,000 of these terrible auto loans and mash them together into a massive, opaque pool. The mathematical models tell the credit rating agencies that all 10,000 struggling borrowers will not default at the exact same second. Therefore, the models argue that the sheer massive volume of the garbage somehow dilutes the risk. Through the pure alchemy of structured finance, a pile of predatory auto debt is transformed into an auto asset-backed security. Wall Street takes this pool and slices it into different layers of risk, selling the very top layer as a AAA-rated bond. They declare it to be just as safe as a United States Treasury bill, completely obscuring the toxic nature of the underlying loans. They are taking pure financial lead and selling it to the public markets as solid gold. Following the devastating housing crash, regulators promised us strict oversight. Yet, here we are today, watching private equity firms and shadowy non-bank lenders completely bypass traditional banking regulations. They are actively feeding a massive meat grinder of subprime auto debt. The fuse on this bomb has already been lit. Millions of hard-working Americans have been sold depreciating vehicles with loan-to-value ratios that ensure they will be financially underwater the exact moment the tires touch public asphalt. The subprime auto time bomb is ticking relentlessly, inflated by a post-pandemic buying frenzy and a desperate Wall Street hunt for yield in a shifting economy. The repo man dragging the Nissan away is just the visible symptom. The actual disease is a financial system that figured out how to package human desperation, rate it AAA, and seamlessly sell it to your retirement fund. To truly understand how this invisible trap is set, we have to leave the boardrooms of Manhattan and look closely at where the raw materials are mined. The scene is a sprawling buy here, pay here lot on the dusty outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The year is 2022. The desert sun is beating down on rows of aggressively polished, high-mileage metal. A desperate buyer with a 550 credit score walks onto the lot. They urgently need a car to commute to their warehouse job because, outside of a handful of dense urban centers with rail systems, a personal vehicle is a strict prerequisite for survival in America. You cannot work or buy groceries without one. The subprime auto lender knows the buyer has absolutely zero leverage in this negotiation. They are not selling cars here. They are selling transportation hostage-taking. The dealer spots them a 2016 Chevrolet Equinox. The car has 80,000 miles on the odometer and a Kelley Blue Book wholesale value of roughly $10,000. The dealer slaps the hood, smiling broadly. But the price tag handed to the buyer is not $10,000. Through a predatory combination of hidden dealer markups, mandatory extended warranties, and opaque administrative fees, the principal amount artificially balloons. The buyer sits in a cramped, windowless finance office. They have an older trade-in vehicle that still has $4,000 owed on the note, but the dealer is only offering $2,000 for the trade. The dealer leans across the cheap desk. "Do not worry about the negative equity," he says smoothly, pointing at the paperwork. "We will just roll that $2,000 difference directly into your new loan. Keep it all in one easy monthly payment." Now, the starting principal on the 2016 Equinox is a staggering $17,000. Then comes the interest rate strike. Because the borrower is subprime and trapped, the financing company slaps a 24.9% annual percentage rate on the loan. To make the monthly payments mathematically possible for a warehouse worker, the lender simply extends the term of the loan to 84 months. That is 7 full years of payments. By the time the loan is finally paid off, the borrower will have paid nearly $35,000 for a rusted vehicle that was inherently worth only $10,000. The dealer has one final mechanism to ensure absolute compliance. Before the borrower is allowed to drive off the lot, a lot mechanic installs a GPS tracking and starter interrupt device beneath the plastic dashboard. If the borrower is even 48 hours late on their monthly payment, a collection agent sitting in a sterile office park hundreds of miles away simply clicks a mouse on their computer monitor. The car engine will not crank. The borrower cannot go to the warehouse to earn the wages needed to pay the loan. The trap snaps completely shut. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has repeatedly flagged these exact predatory practices, highlighting how dealers intentionally increase the interest rate far above what the borrower actually qualifies for, and quietly split the cash difference with the lender. But American auto dealers wield immense political lobbying power in Washington, successfully securing massive exemptions from direct federal oversight during financial reform. The dealership is merely the origination point of the crisis. The dealer gets their massive markup paid in cash immediately and washes their hands of the transaction. But the subprime lender who originated the loan does not want to hold on to a highly risky 24.9% loan for 7 long years. That ties up their operating capital and exposes them to massive default risk. They want their cash back immediately, so they can underwrite another overpriced Equinox for the next desperate commuter who walks onto the gravel lot. They need a buyer with incredibly deep pockets and an insatiable appetite for debt. They need an institutional entity willing to buy billions of dollars of high-risk consumer paper without asking too many questions about the quality of the underlying asset. Enter the massive investment banks of Manhattan. The raw materials of the financial bomb have been successfully mined in the desert, and now they are being shipped directly to Wall Street, where the sharpest financial engineers in the world are waiting to turn this toxic subprime sludge into pristine investment-grade securities. New York City, a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the East River. It is 2021. The Federal Reserve has slashed interest rates to zero to heavily stimulate the economy, successfully saving the banking system but creating a massive nightmare for pension funds. A pension fund managing the retirement money of municipal teachers, firefighters, and sanitation workers relies on a steady, mathematically predictable return of around 7% a year to ensure it can pay out its older retirees. Traditionally, they achieved this safe yield by simply buying stable government bonds. But with national interest rates at absolute zero, government bonds pay virtually nothing to the investor. Starved for yield, conservative pension fund managers are forced to look much further out on the dangerous risk spectrum. Wall Street investment bankers are waiting for them with open arms, fresh coffee, and a glossy, perfectly designed brochure for auto asset-backed securities. The bankers have taken those thousands of terrible car loans from the desert lots and aggressively bundled them into special-purpose trusts. The Wall Street banker slides a thick legal prospectus across the mahogany table to the skeptical pension fund manager. "Look at this structure," the banker says, tapping a polished finger on a bar chart. "We have a AAA-rated bond right here. It is just as statistically safe as a United States Treasury bond. The major rating agencies guarantee the math. But because it is heavily backed by American auto loans instead of government debt, it pays 3 or 4% more yield than a treasury. And do not worry about the subprime borrowers defaulting. Americans absolutely love their cars. They will stop paying their high-interest credit cards and default on their home mortgages long before they ever stop paying their car loans. They need to drive to work to survive. It is an incredibly easy, seductive sell. Billions of dollars of institutional retirement money aggressively flow into the subprime auto space, providing the exact unlimited liquidity that allows the corner-used car lots to keep writing predatory loans. To sell this massive pool of consumer debt to institutional investors, Wall Street uses a foundational mechanism called tranching. They slice the massive pool of auto loans into different vertical layers of risk, exactly like a multi-tiered wedding cake. The senior tranche gets paid first when the car buyers make their monthly payments. Because they are legally the first to get paid, the rating agencies slap a flawless AAA rating on this top layer. The mezzanine tranche gets paid second, taking on a bit more mathematical risk in exchange for a slightly higher interest rate, usually earning a BBB rating. Then there is the equity tranche at the very bottom. This is the toxic waste of the deal. These bold investors get paid absolute last. If borrowers start missing payments, the equity tranche takes the financial losses first. To magically convince hedge funds to buy this bottom layer, the promised cash returns are massive. Wall Street confidently claims this structure protects the top pension investors entirely. The foundational lie holding up this entire multi-billion-dollar market is a concept called overcollateralization. Wall Street bankers argue that because these loans are fully backed by physical cars, they are completely immune to loss. If the borrower defaults, the repo man takes the car is sold at a wholesale auction, and the investors effortlessly recover their money. But this completely ignores a glaring, brutal economic reality. A car is not a house. Houses generally appreciate in value, or at least hold their worth over a 30-year timeline. Cars are rapidly depreciating pieces of metal. They are rust and rubber, losing massive value with every single mile driven on the highway. The physical collateral supposedly backing these AAA-rated securities is a complete illusion. The original loans were written for 150% of the vehicle's actual wholesale value. Private equity giants smell the massive profit margins and aggressively buy up local lenders to feed the securitization machine. The music is playing loudly, but the engine is about to completely fail. Fast forward to early 2024. The macroeconomic weather across the United States has violently changed. The post-pandemic world brings a toxic cocktail of historic inflation, the sudden cessation of government stimulus checks, and the most aggressive Federal Reserve interest rate hiking cycle in 4 decades. Everything costs significantly more. Monthly rent is up, groceries are up, gasoline at the pump is up. For the subprime borrower living strictly paycheck to paycheck, something eventually has to give. The math on the kitchen table no longer works. The American borrower is playing a desperate shell game every single month, deciding whether to pay the landlord, the local grocer, or the auto lender. For a long time, the auto lender won that battle because of the aggressive GPS kill switch under the dashboard. But now, the American consumer is entirely tapped out of cash and credit, and the raw economic data shows exactly what is giving way first in the system. The exhausted borrower looks at their 2016 Chevy Equinox parked in the driveway. The transmission is slipping badly. The local mechanic says it needs a $3,000 repair to run safely. The borrower sits down at the table and does the brutal math. I currently owe $17,000 on this car loan, the borrower realizes. But Kelly Blue Book says the vehicle is only worth $4,000 right now. The psychological incentive to keep making that $1,000 monthly payment instantly disappears. Why pay $17,000 for a broken piece of metal worth a fraction of that amount? They decide to simply walk away from the financial obligation. They leave the plastic keys in the ignition and let the repo man take it in the middle of the night. This is known in the financial industry as a strategic default, and it is no longer an isolated incident. It is happening in massive droves across working-class neighborhoods nationwide. During the chaotic pandemic chip shortage, the global supply of new cars plummeted, causing the prices of used cars to skyrocket to absurd, record-breaking highs on the dealership lots. Desperate consumers took out massive extended-term loans to buy severely overpriced used inventory. Now, the global supply chains have normalized, and used car prices are crashing rapidly back to earth. This sudden drop means millions of auto loans originated in 2021 and 2022 are now massively underwater. The physical collateral base backing the Wall Street securities is evaporating into thin air. When the repo man brings that Equinox to the wholesale auto auction, the lender does not recover $17,000. They recover $3,500. There is a $13,500 immediate shortfall. Multiply this staggering financial loss by tens of thousands of vehicles across the country, and the precise mathematics of the bond market begin to shatter entirely. The financial warning signs are now flashing bright red across every institutional dashboard. According to Fitch Ratings, the percentage of subprime auto borrowers who are at least 60 days behind on their payments recently hit 6.13%. This is not just a highly concerning number. It is the absolute highest figure recorded since Fitch began tracking the data in 1996. It is significantly higher than the massive delinquency rate during the 2008 Great Recession. It is higher than the absolute peak of the pandemic economic lockdowns. We are currently witnessing a historic, catastrophic failure of consumer auto debt. The Wall Street Journal reports that repo companies are literally running out of physical land to store the vehicles they are dragging out of driveways. Used car auctions are completely flooded with repossessed inventory, driving down wholesale prices even further. The vicious downward spiral is accelerating rapidly. The severe financial fallout always begins in the shadows. Unlike 2008, where major depository institutions like Citigroup and Bank of America were directly holding the bag on toxic mortgages, today's subprime auto loans are largely originated and held by non-bank financial institutions. Massive private credit firms, highly leveraged hedge funds, and independent auto finance companies operate completely outside the strict regulatory gaze of the Federal Reserve. Because these aggressive entities are not traditional banks, they do not have access to the protective discount window at the central bank in times of severe crisis. If a major subprime auto lender faces a sudden liquidity crunch because the wholesale value of their repossessed cars crashes, they cannot be quietly bailed out over a long holiday weekend. They will simply run out of operating cash and instantly collapse under their own massive debt weight. The shadow banking system was designed to evade regulation, but in doing so, it removed the safety nets that prevent outright contagion. When a shadow bank dies, it dies violently. A midnight panic meeting is called between a regional bank executive and the chief financial officer of a massive shadow lending firm. The shadow lender completely relies on warehouse lines of credit, which is short-term funding provided by regional banks to make the car loans before they are bundled and securitized on Wall Street. "We need to extend our credit line by 50 million, the shadow lender says, sweating through his expensive suit. Defaults are spiking and the auction houses are giving us pennies on the dollar for the repossessed cars." The regional banker shakes his head coldly. "We are freezing your credit line today. The underlying collateral is officially worthless, and no one on Wall Street wants to buy the bottom tranches of your securitization deals anymore." Without the short-term cash flow from the regional bank, the shadow lender halts all lending operations immediately. The Wall Street securitization machine jams completely. The pipeline of cash flow simply stops. The shadow lender is paralyzed. As nationwide defaults skyrocket, the bottom tranches of those auto-asset-backed securities, the toxic waste equity layers, begin taking incredibly heavy mathematical losses. Eventually, as the massive losses eat upward through the tranches like an aggressive financial virus, they reach the higher-rated tiers. The mezzanine bonds break their covenants. Then, the absolute unthinkable happens to the institutional investors. The AAA-rated bonds face severe immediate downgrades from the major rating agencies. When a massive pension fund holds a bond that is suddenly downgraded from AAA to junk status, their strict institutional mandates force them to sell the bond immediately, regardless of the terrible market price. They dump the bonds onto the open market at a massive loss. When everyone on Wall Street rushes to the tiny exit door at the exact same time, the market freezes entirely. There are absolutely no buyers stepping in. That is precisely how a debt bubble violently bursts. The illusion of safety shatters, leaving only raw panic. Whenever the terrifying comparison to the global housing crash is made, financial apologists on television are incredibly quick to point out a mathematical reality. The auto loan market is $1.6 trillion, while the real estate mortgage market was $10 trillion. They confidently assure the public it is a perfectly contained risk and not big enough to bring down the global financial system. This is a massively dangerous miscalculation of systemic risk. The danger of a financial time bomb is not always the pure size of the explosion. It is the proximity of the blast to essential economic infrastructure and the immense shrapnel it aggressively creates. If a subprime borrower loses their car, they literally cannot get to work. If they cannot get to work, they lose their job. If they lose their job, they instantly stop paying their credit cards, their medical debt, and their monthly rent. The massive contagion is not just financial, it is deeply economic. The financial shrapnel from this specific explosion hits two distinctly different classes of Americans, linking them permanently in a terrifying closed-loop ecosystem. On one side of the country is a single mother in Ohio, whose entire life is completely upended when her aggressively overpriced sedan is towed away in the dead of night. On the other side of the country is a public school teacher in California, reviewing her quarterly retirement statement, completely unaware that her pension fund is acting as the primary bank for a predatory used car lot in the Midwest. The American worker's retirement account is actively being used to finance the predatory debt that is financially crushing the American working class. It is a profound moral failure, completely hidden behind spreadsheets and complex financial algorithms. We constructed an economy that demands an individual have a car to survive, and then allowed a predatory class to aggressively weaponize that fundamental necessity. The sheer absurdity of the financial system is entirely by design. Look closely at the exact incentives of every single player involved in the trade. The used car dealer does not care if the borrower defaults, because he got his massive markup paid in cash on day one. The Wall Street investment bank does not care, because they collected their massive underwriting fees the exact moment they securitized the thousands of loans. The corporate credit rating agency does not care, because they got paid their standard fee to proudly stamp AAA on the bond prospectus. The actual risk is completely disconnected from the originators. The only people left holding the heavy bag when the music stops are the borrower whose life is ruined by a sudden repossession, and the pension fund whose mathematically safe investment suddenly turns to pure dust. Everyone else efficiently extracted their wealth and walked away cleanly. They engineered a system without consequences for the architects. Consumer spending officially accounts for nearly 70% of the United States' gross domestic product. If millions of average Americans are mathematically removed from the consumer economy because they are drowning in 25% auto debt and facing wage garnishments from aggressive auto deficiency judgments, the entire macroeconomic engine violently stalls out. Credit card delinquencies are already hitting massive record highs alongside these auto defaults. The subprime auto market is not an isolated pocket of containable risk. It is the ultimate canary in the coal mine of the American consumer. We have watched this exact movie before. In the lead-up to the housing crash, investigative reporters and rogue financial analysts aggressively pointed at the absurdity of the massive securitization machine. The establishment completely ignored them because there was simply far too much easy money to be made. History proves that Wall Street will push an asset class until it completely breaks. The mechanics of greed do not change. Today, the warning signs are blinking bright red on the economic dashboard. Subprime auto delinquencies are aggressively breaking historical records. Used car values are plummeting rapidly. Repo yards are overflowing into empty retail parking lots across the country. Pension funds are sitting on billions in toxic debt backed by depreciating metal and financially broken consumers. Private equity shadow banks are highly leveraged and incredibly fragile. Wall Street learned absolutely nothing from the housing crash. They simply found a new, unregulated asset class to exploit. The time bomb is actively ticking in the driveways of Middle America. When it finally detonates, it will completely decimate the wealth of millions of families, blow a massive hole in institutional retirement funds, and expose the catastrophic systemic greed at the core of American high finance. This system relies entirely on your ignorance to keep functioning. Do not be the one left holding the bag when the market freezes. Hit subscribe, study the mechanisms of capital, and prepare yourself for the crash that is already parked directly outside your door.